Oil prices are weaker, and that can sometimes weigh on the London market, of course. And with that in mind, oil falling again as OPEC Plus seeks more time to reach a deal on production policy after talks wound up without agreement. Ministers will now meet on Thursday this week rather than Tuesday, rather than today, to allow more time to deliberate on whether to delay a planned increase in output that was scheduled from January. We're joined now by Alex Booth, Head of Market Analysis at Kepler. Good to speak to you, Alex. So what kind of signal do you take from the news that the meeting itself has been delayed, or the ongoing meeting has been delayed until Thursday? It won't take place until then. What kind of signal is that for you?
Yeah, hi, good morning. I think what it demonstrates is just how hard the group is, how hard the situation in the group is at the moment, given what is actually quite kind of conflicting signals from the data that we see in the market. I think ultimately we're in a period of relative stability, having had such a tumultuous year. However, depending on what data sets you look at, we could really be heading in one direction or another here. Yes, we are in a generally more positive demand environment in Asia. However, it will be interesting to see what happens with the statistics coming out of the US this week in terms of what demand was like, what transportation demand was like in Thanksgiving last week. I think that will give a real kind of foretaste of what we can expect through the holiday period in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of very conflicting data, basically.
So the conflicting data, the divergent picture, all to do with the East-West divide then, Alex.
Yeah.
Which should win out then in OPEC's thinking right now, with the state of global growth as it is, with the state of global recovery as it is in Asia and maybe not so much in parts of the West? Which of these data sets should be uppermost in the minds of those OPEC delegates?
Well, ultimately, through the last 6 months or so, the market has improved massively. It was a terrible situation kind of back in spring. We have been taking oil off the water, the net crude imports, importing more. We have been importing more crude than we've been exporting. But the issue is that has been decreasing. So we went from about 1.5 million barrels a day of net imports back in September to only about 500,000 barrels a day now. So you have to see a continuation of the recovery in Asia to really get behind any increase in production at this point. Now, things are good in China. They are still importing crude. However, that is also going into storage. So we've seen a huge build in onshore inventories through the course of the year. We're up about 280 million barrels by the end of November versus last year. But that means that it's harder for us to absorb barrels onshore. If we look at Europe, things are better in OECD Europe. But in terms of imports, we're still down 1 million barrels a day over the last few months compared to Q1 of this year. And as I say, I think Q1 is really just too early to be bringing that level, that volume of crude back. Because things are going to be very slow through the winter here in the Western Hemisphere. And ultimately, how much can Asia kind of depend on its own internal demand relative to growth in the rest of the world?
Okay, so it sounds as if you're suggesting then, Alex, that you think there will be eventually a decision to postpone any kind of production increase. As a global picture then, a global narrative, if we are taking oil off the water, so storing less oil actually out there on the seas, but we are also increasing onshore inventories, what does that tell us in total about the storage picture globally?
I think ultimately it's a very fine balance, and I think this is why there is such a difficult situation. It's so hard to come to an agreement within the organization at the moment, because any significant change from here, and I do feel that we will be going back into an oversupplied market. And I think you just have to look at the price action on that. Any serious recovery in the prompt is going to kind of lead to this gradual tick up in production in the US. And any kind of material strength in spreads, again, is just going to incentivize some of these barrels to come out of storage onshore and just pressure that market further. So there really is a very, very fine balancing line at the moment.
We've seen some rebellion within the OPEC ranks, let alone OPEC Plus, Alex. I'm thinking in particular about the UAE, a break with their commitment to quotas. They got something of a dressing down, it seemed, in Riyadh. And then other analysts point to maybe unhappiness amongst the Nigerians, amongst the Iraqis and others. Where do you see the tension in OPEC as most significant at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that after the events of this year, the price action of this year, a lot of the producers are under severe budgetary pressure. And I think we will see an agreement. I think whether that's at the kind of the continuation of the full 2 million barrel a day cuts. Ultimately, the countries understand, they look back at what happened at the start of the year. They see what can happen to price action with the levels of overproduction. And as I was saying, the onshore ability to absorb all of those extra barrels is going to be very hard to see. You look at what happened with Chinese buying from US barrels back in kind of April, May time, that they're only just being digested, or they've only relatively recently been digested, basically in China. Can that happen again? I think it's very hard. So I think they'll be wary of what happened earlier on this year to really steer that decision.
We understand that overnight, Alex, the Saudi oil minister threatened to resign from a key OPEC Plus panel, perhaps out of frustration. Perhaps he also concerned about some of the things that you mention. What tack should Saudi take here? What role are they playing?
Very good question. I think trying to second guess any of the OPEC Plus members' moves at the moment is a very difficult or dangerous game here. I think they will want to get a decision. They'll want a kind of a positive outcome over the meetings this week. But ultimately, they've demonstrated that they're kind of prepared to flex their muscle when they need to reach a consensus decision. I think it just demonstrates the sheer frustration that they feel, because ultimately Saudi is hurting as well with price down at this level. It's just very, they have bigger buffers essentially compared to other producing countries, but they are also hurting at this level, and it's kind of the long game here for them, I think.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks for joining us. Alex Booth, Head of Market Analysis at Kepler. Really good to get your insights on the oil market.